The Wyoming wind howled across the Lone Star Ranch like a morning song, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another bitter winter. Ezra Zeke McKinnon stood at the edge of his property, shovel in hand, staring down at the hole he'd just finished digging. At 62, his weathered hands shook slightly, not from the cold, but from the cancer eating away at his insides like a hungry wolf. The grave was perfect, 6 feet deep, neat edges, positioned under the old cottonwood tree where his beloved horse Thunder was buried. It was where Zeke planned to spend eternity, alone as he'd lived for the past 30 years since consumption took his wife Sarah and their unborn child. "Well, Thunder," he said to the marked grave beside the fresh hole, "looks like I'll be joining you soon enough. Doc says I got maybe a week, 2 at most." Zeke had been a loner by choice after tragedy struck. He'd built his ranch from nothing, worked it single-handedly, and kept the world at arm's length. No friends, no family, no visitors. Just him, his cattle, and the endless expanse of Wyoming wilderness, the way he preferred it. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky pink and gold, Zeke decided to check his fence line one last time. It was a ritual he'd performed every morning for 3 decades, ensuring his boundaries were secure and his cattle safe. After this week, it wouldn't matter anymore. But old habits died hardened like him, apparently, which was taking its sweet time. The pain in his chest flared as he walked, each breath a reminder of the enemy within. He'd refused the doctor's offers of medicine or treatment. What was the point? He had no one to live for, nothing left to accomplish. Sarah and their child were waiting for him on the other side, and he was ready to go. The eastern fence line ran along a dusty trail that connected the nearest town, Cedar Ridge, to the railroad depot 20 miles south. Zeke rarely saw travelers on this road. Most folks took the main highway. But as he approached the fence that morning, something unusual caught his eye. A bundle of cloth, no bigger than a saddlebag, sat propped against his fence post. At first, Zeke thought it might be supplies dropped by a passing traveler, or perhaps something blown by the wind. But as he drew closer, the bundle moved, and then it cried. Zeke's heart nearly stopped. Inside the carefully wrapped blankets was a baby, a tiny girl, no more than a few weeks old, with wisps of golden hair and the bluest eyes he'd ever seen. She was crying weakly, her small fists waving in the morning air. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Zeke whispered, dropping to his knees beside the bundle. What in tarnation? The baby was cold but alive, wrapped in what looked like expensive blankets with delicate embroidery. A small basket sat beside her, containing several bottles of milk, clean diapers, and a folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, Zeke unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky, as if written in great distress. "Please, kind sir, take care of my precious daughter Rose. I cannot provide for her, and I cannot keep her safe. She deserves a chance at life that I cannot give her. There are men hunting for us, and if they find her with me, they will kill us both. I have heard you are a good man who keeps to himself. Please give her the life I cannot. Her father was a good man who died protecting others. She has his courage and my love. I will pray every day that God watches over you both." A desperate mother. Zeke read the note 3 times, his mind reeling. Someone had left this baby Rose at his fence, trusting a complete stranger with her life. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man preparing to die, and life had literally been delivered to his doorstep. Rose had stopped crying and was looking up at him, with those impossibly blue eyes, as if she somehow knew he was deciding her fate. Her tiny hand reached out and wrapped around his weathered finger with surprising strength. "Well, little one," Zeke said softly, "seems like we're both in a fix. I'm dying, and you need someone to live for." He looked back toward his ranch house, then at the fresh grave he'd dug for himself, then down at the baby girl who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer he'd never thought to make. The pain in his chest seemed less sharp somehow, pushed aside by a feeling he hadn't experienced in 30 years. Purpose. Carefully, Zeke lifted Rose into his arms, surprised by how natural it felt despite his lack of experience with children. She settled against his chest with a contented sigh, as if she'd found exactly where she belonged. "All right, Rose," he said, starting the walk back to his house. "Looks like you just gave an old dying man a reason to stick around a little longer." As they reached the ranch house, Zeke realized he had no idea how to care for a baby. He'd never even held one before, but looking down at Rose's peaceful face, he felt something stirring in his chest that had nothing to do with cancer. It was hope. The next few hours were a comedy of errors as Zeke tried to figure out the basics of baby care. Feeding Rose from the bottles proved challenging, until he remembered watching his neighbor's wife years ago and tried warming the milk. Changing diapers was an adventure that left both him and Rose requiring clean clothes, but somehow they managed. Rose seemed to understand that Zeke was doing his best, and she was patient with his fumbling attempts. By afternoon, they'd established a rhythm of sorts: feeding, sleeping, and quiet moments where Zeke found himself talking to her about everything and nothing. "You know, Rose," he said as she dozed in his arms that evening, "I had this whole plan worked out. Figured I'd be buried under that cottonwood by now. But here you are, changing everything." He looked out the window at the grave he'd dug, now seeming like a relic from another lifetime. The pain was still there. The cancer hadn't magically disappeared, but for the first time in months, death didn't feel like a relief. It felt like abandonment. That night, as Rose slept in a makeshift crib he'd fashioned from a wooden crate and some blankets, Zeke sat by the window keeping watch. The note had mentioned men hunting for Rose and her mother. If that was true, they might come looking for the baby. As if summoned by his thoughts, he saw dust clouds on the horizon, riders approaching fast in the moonlight. 3 men on horseback, moving with the purpose of those who meant business. Zeke checked his rifle and moved to the window, his protective instincts surprising him with their intensity. Rose stirred in her makeshift crib, and Zeke realized that in the space of one day, everything had changed. He was no longer a man waiting to die. He was a man with something precious to protect, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone harm one hair on that baby's golden head. The riders were getting closer, and Zeke McKinnon was about to discover that sometimes when you think your story is ending, life hands you a new chapter you never saw coming. Don't miss what happens when the mysterious riders arrive. Subscribe to our channel for more heart-stopping Western adventures. The 3 horsemen approached the Lone Star Ranch like harbingers of death, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hat brims. Zeke McKinnon stood at his window, rifle in hand, watching them rein up near his front porch. Baby Rose slept peacefully in her makeshift crib, unaware that danger had found them so soon. The leader of the group was a tall, lean man dressed in black from head to toe. Even in the moonlight, Zeke could see the silver star pinned to his vesta, U.S. Marshal's badge, but something about the man's bearing set Zeke's teeth on edge. This wasn't the posture of a lawman seeking justice. This was the stance of a predator. "Hello, the house," the marshal called out. "Marshal Cyrus Blackwood, U.S. Marshal Service. I need to speak with you about a missing child." Zeke's blood ran cold. The name Blackwood triggered a memory. He'd heard that name before, usually associated with corruption and violence in the territorial courts. If this was the same Blackwood family, Rose was in more danger than he'd imagined. "It's past midnight, Marshal," Zeke called back through the closed door. "Come back in the morning if you want to talk." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Blackwood replied, his voice carrying a threat beneath its official tone. "We have reason to believe a kidnapped infant was brought to this area. We're conducting a thorough search of all properties." Behind Blackwood, his 2 companions dismounted. They weren't wearing badges, and their hands rested casually on their gun butts. These weren't deputies, they were hired guns. "I haven't seen any kidnapped babies," Zeke said firmly. "Now I suggest you move along before I start thinking you're not who you claim to be." Blackwood's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Mr. McKinnon, isn't it? We know you're out here all alone. Been keeping to yourself for 30 years, they tell me. Must get lonely, talking to yourself all the time." The fact that Blackwood knew his name and his history made Zeke's skin crawl. This wasn't a random search. They knew exactly where they were going and who they were looking for. Rose stirred in her crib, making a small sound that seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Zeke's heart hammered as he prayed she wouldn't cry and give them away. "The thing is, McKinnon," Blackwood continued, "we found some interesting evidence on the trail leading to your property. Baby blankets, milk bottles, the kind of things someone might drop if they were in a hurry. Now, you can let us in peacefully to search your place. Or we can come in the hard way. Your choice. Zeke looked down at Rose, sleeping so trustingly in her makeshift bed. The note from her mother flashed through his mind. There are men hunting for us. And if they find her with me, they will kill us both. These had to be the men she was referring to. And they weren't here to rescue a kidnapped child. They were here to silence a witness. I told you. I haven't seen any baby, Zeke repeated. And you're not searching my home without a proper warrant signed by a territorial judge. Warrant. Blackwood's voice turned mocking. Old man, I am the law out here, and I say we're searching this place from top to bottom. The sound of boots on his porch told Zeke that diplomacy was over. He'd spent 30 years avoiding conflict, keeping to himself, minding his own business, but looking at innocent Rose, sleeping peacefully. He realized some things were worth fighting for. As the door handle turned, Zeke raised his rifle. That's far enough, Marshal. You come through that door without invitation, and I'll consider you trespassers with criminal intent. You're threatening a federal marshal, McKinnon, Blackwood snarled. That's a hanging offense, and breaking into a man's home without proper authority is assault. Zeke shot back. I may be old, but I know my rights. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Rose chose that moment to wake up and begin crying, not the weak mewling from earlier, but a full-throated wail that echoed through the small house like a beacon. Blackwood's triumphant laugh chilled Zeke to the bone. Well, seems like our kidnapped baby has quite a set of lungs on her. Boys, I think it's time we collected our property. The door exploded inward as one of Blackwood's men kicked it open. Zeke fired once, catching the first gunman in the shoulder and spinning him around. But before he could work the bolt on his rifle, the second gunman was through the door with his pistol drawn. Drop it, old man, or I'll drop you where you stand. Zeke found himself staring down the barrel of a Colt .45, knowing that one wrong move would leave Rose defenseless against these wolves in human clothing. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. Blackwood entered the house, his pale eyes scanning the room, until they fell on Rose's crib. His smile was the kind a snake might wear if snakes could smile. There's our little runaway, he said, approaching the crib. Marshal Cyrus Blackwood. At your service, Miss Rose. Your grandfather has been very worried about you. Grandfather? Zeke's mind raced. The note had mentioned Rose's father dying while protecting others, but said nothing about family. If Blackwood was claiming to be her grandfather, there was more to this story than a simple kidnapping. She's not going anywhere with you, Zeke said, stepping between Blackwood and the crib. Blackwood's hand moved to his gun. Old man, you're already in more trouble than you can handle. Don't make it worse by getting between a grandfather and his granddaughter. If you're her grandfather, where's her mother? Zeke demanded. Why isn't she here looking for her own child? For just a moment, something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or satisfaction. Tragically, the baby's mother died in childbirth complications. Very sad. The child is now my ward, and I'm here to take her home where she belongs. Zeke knew Blackwood was lying. The note had been written by a desperate mother, not a dying woman. Whatever had happened to Rose's mother, Blackwood was responsible for it. Funny thing, Zeke said, buying time while he tried to figure out how to protect Rose. For a grieving grandfather, you sure brought a lot of firepower to collect one baby. Blackwood's mask of civility finally slipped completely. The child's mother was involved with some very dangerous people, McKinnon. People who might try to use the baby against our family. We have to be prepared for anything. As Blackwood reached for Rose, she began crying again, her tiny fists waving in distress. Something primal awakened in Zeke, a protective fury he hadn't felt since Sarah's death. This bastard wasn't taking Rose, not while there was breath in his body. Don't touch her, Zeke growled, his hand inching toward the hunting knife on his belt. Or what? Blackwood sneered. You'll bore me to death with stories about your lonely ranch. Face it, old man, you're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck. But as Blackwood reached into the crib, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from outside. Multiple riders, moving fast, through the broken door. Zeke could see torches blazing in the distance, Blackwood cursed under his breath. "Collect the child," he ordered his men. "We're leaving now." As one of the gunmen reached for Rose, the thunder of galloping horses grew louder. Then a voice Zeke recognized called out from the darkness, "U.S. Marshals, surrender your weapons and come out with your hands visible." Deputy Marshal Tom Crawford, the same man who'd helped save Thomas Fletcher in Redemption Creek, had arrived with a posse of 6 armed men. But how had he known to come? Blackwood's face went white with rage. He'd been so close to claiming Rose, and now his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. "This isn't over, McKinnon," he hissed. "That child belongs to my family, and I will have her." As the corrupt marshal and his men fled through the back of the house, Zeke scooped Rose into his arms, holding her protectively against his chest. The baby seemed to sense that the immediate danger had passed and quieted in his embrace. Marshal Crawford appeared in the doorway, his badge gleaming in the lamplight. "Mr. McKinnon, are you and the child safe?" "We are now," Zeke replied, though his hands were still shaking. "How did you know to come?" Crawford smiled grimly. "Got a telegraph from a woman named Mary Catherine Blackwood Mitchell. Said her father-in-law Cyrus Blackwood was hunting for a baby girl named Rose, and that innocent lives were in danger. Seems this little one has more friends than her enemies realize." As dawn broke over the Lone Star Ranch once again, Zeke realized that his quiet, solitary life was over forever. He'd found his reason to live in baby Rose, but keeping her safe was going to require more courage than he'd ever imagined. Subscribe now to see how Zeke protects baby Rose and uncovers the shocking truth about her family. Don't miss the explosive conclusion. 3 weeks had passed since the night Marshal Crawford and his posse drove off Cyrus Blackwood and his hired guns. The Lone Star Ranch, once a symbol of solitude and approaching death, had been transformed into something Zeke McKinnon never thought he'd see again, a home filled with life and purpose. Baby Rose had thrived under Zeke's care, growing stronger each day. She'd learned to recognize his voice and would gurgle happily when he sang the old cowboy songs Sarah used to love. The cancer was still there, eating away at his insides, but somehow it seemed less urgent now. He had work to do, a little girl to protect, and that gave him strength he didn't know he still possessed. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was packed to the rafters on the morning of the custody hearing. Word had spread about the mysterious baby found at the Lone Star Ranch and the corrupt marshal who'd tried to claim her. Supporters had come from across the territory, ranchers, townspeople, and even some of the women's suffrage activists who saw Rose's case as a symbol of protecting the innocent from powerful men. Judge Harrison Whitmore, a stern but fair man in his 60s, presided over the proceedings. He'd served on the territorial bench for 20 years and had a reputation for not being swayed by wealth or influence. Cyrus Blackwood sat at the plaintiff's table with his expensive lawyers, his pale eyes fixed on Rose, who dozed peacefully in Zeke's arms. Blackwood had cleaned up his image for court. Gone were the hired guns and threatening demeanor, replaced by the facade of a grieving grandfather seeking custody of his orphan granddaughter. "Your Honor," Blackwood's lead attorney, a slick man named Pemberton, began his opening argument. "My client is here today seeking justice for his family. His daughter-in-law, tragically deceased, kidnapped his granddaughter and abandoned her in the wilderness. Mr. Blackwood, despite his grief, simply wants to provide a proper home for the child." It was a masterful lie, delivered with conviction and backed by forged documents claiming Rose's mother had died in childbirth. If not for the intervention of an unexpected witness, it might have worked. Mary Catherine Blackwood Mitchell entered the courtroom like an avenging angel, her chin high and her amber eyes blazing with determination. The gasp that went through the packed courtroom was audible. Rose's mother was very much alive, and she was here to tell the truth. "Your Honor," said Samuel Patterson, the lawyer who'd volunteered to represent Zeke and Rose, "I'd like to call our first witness, Mrs. Mary Catherine Mitchell, the child's mother." Cyrus Blackwood went white as a sheet. His carefully constructed story was about to crumble, and everyone in the courtroom could see it. Mary took the witness stand with dignity, her hands steady as she placed them on the Bible. Through an interpreter who knew sign language, she told her story: how Cyrus Blackwood had murdered her husband James, threatened to kill baby Rose, and forced her to flee for their lives. I left my daughter with Mr. McKinnon because I knew he was a good man, Mary signed. Her words translated for the court. I couldn't protect her while Cyrus was hunting us, but I knew she'd be safe with someone who would love her, and I was right. Pemberton tried to discredit Mary's testimony, claiming she was mentally unstable due to her deafness and grief. But Judge Whitmore shut down that line of questioning immediately. "Counselor," the judge said sternly, "in this courtroom, we judge people by their character and truthfulness, not by their physical abilities. Mrs. Mitchell's testimony stands." The turning point came when Marshal Tom Crawford took the stand. He testified about Cyrus Blackwood's corruption, his network of hired killers, and the pattern of violence that followed the man. "Wherever he went, Your Honor," Crawford said, "Cyrus Blackwood isn't seeking custody out of love, he's seeking to eliminate a witness to his crimes. That baby girl represents evidence of his son's murder and his own corruption." As witness after witness testified to Zeke's character and Blackwood's criminality, the old rancher found himself overwhelmed by the support. Neighbors he'd barely spoken to in 30 years stood up to vouch for his integrity. Doc Patterson testified that while Zeke was indeed ill, he was fully capable of caring for a child, and that the responsibility had actually improved his health. But it was Zeke's own testimony that brought tears to every eye in the courtroom. "Your Honor," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "3 weeks ago I was a dying man with nothing to live for. I'd even dug my own grave, figuring it was time to give up. Then Rose appeared at my fence like a miracle, and everything changed." He looked down at the baby sleeping in Mary's arms. Mother and daughter had been reunited that morning in an emotional scene that had left everyone in tears. "I know I'm old, and I know I'm sick," Zeke continued, "but I love that little girl like she was my own flesh and blood. She gave me a reason to fight, a reason to hope. If this court thinks I'm the best man to raise her, I'll do everything in my power to give her the life she deserves." Judge Whitmore deliberated for less than an hour. When he returned, his expression was grave but determined. "In the matter of custody for the child Rose Mitchell," he began, "this court finds that Cyrus Blackwood has no legal standing to claim guardianship. His actions constitute criminal conspiracy, and I'm ordering his immediate arrest." U.S. Marshals moved to arrest Blackwood, who tried to flee but was quickly surrounded. As they led him away in shackles, he turned back to glare at Zeke with pure hatred. "This isn't over, McKinnon," he snarled. "I'll find a way to get that child. Furthermore," Judge Whitmore continued, "this court awards temporary custody of Rose Mitchell to her mother, Mary Catherine Mitchell, with the understanding that she and Mr. Ezra McKinnon will share in the child's upbringing as they see fit." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Mary embraced Zeke, tears streaming down her face as she signed her gratitude. Rose, awakened by the noise, looked around with her impossibly blue eyes and reached for Zeke, who took her with a smile that transformed his weathered face. 6 months later, the Lone Star Ranch had been transformed once again. Mary had married Sam Briggs, the rancher who'd saved her life in Arizona, and they'd moved to Wyoming to help Zeke raise Rose. The old ranch house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family, and for the first time in 30 years, it rang with laughter and conversation. Zeke's cancer had stabilized. Doc Patterson said he'd never seen anything like it. "Sometimes," the doctor mused, "having something to live for is the best medicine of all." Rose was now a year old, walking with the determined wobble of a toddler and bringing joy to everyone around her. She called Zeke Grandpa Zeke and followed him everywhere, her golden curls bouncing as she chased after the ranch cats. On quiet evenings, Zeke would sit on his porch with Rose on his lap, telling her stories about the ranch and the day she'd appeared at his fence like a gift from heaven. She was too young to understand the words, but she seemed to know that she was loved beyond measure. The grave Zeke had dug for himself had been filled in and planted with wildflowers, Sarah's favorite kind. Instead of marking the end of his story, it had become a symbol of new beginnings and the power of love to transform even the darkest circumstances. Mary often told people that Zeke had saved Rose's life, but Zeke knew the truth. Rose had saved his. She'd given a dying man a reason to live, a lonely soul, a family to love, and a broken heart the chance to heal. And sometimes, late at night when Rose was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Zeke would look up at the stars and whisper a thank you to whatever force had brought them together. He'd prepared for death and found life instead, all because a desperate mother had trusted a stranger with her most precious gift. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, loss, and redemption. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming Western stories that prove love truly can conquer all.